Hi everyone, welcome to another monthly economic update for the month of February 2025 here on our platform Economy.lk. So what I thought of doing today was actually giving you a quick highlight on the budget and a few updates on the monetary sector and the external sector. So starting off with the budget, so the Economic Intelligence Unit did a presentation, and you can find this particular presentation on social media. So what you see here is on the revenue side, the key number that I would look at is the 24% increase in tax revenue. And in absolute terms, what you see is 886 billion rupee increase in tax revenue. And where is that coming from? That is what you see on your top right-hand corner, of 141 billion from income tax, and mainly about 571 billion rupees from taxes on goods and services. And on the next slide, what we see is on the expenditure side of things. And on expenditure, if you look at recurrent expenditure, what you see is a 10% increase in recurrent expenditure of about 5.8 trillion rupees. And where is that 5.8 trillion allocated to? Mainly, what you see on your right-hand side is interest component of 2.9 trillion rupees, and the remaining for salaries and wages of about 1.2 trillion, subsidies and transfers of about 1.3 trillion rupees. And the next slide shows us the revenue and expenditure components as a percentage of GDP. And the key number here is the tax revenue target of 13.9% of GDP for 2025. So what you have to understand with this particular budget is that it is designed according to the Public Financial Management Act that was passed in Parliament during the previous government in 2024. And you have key targets that the government needs to achieve. For example, primary surplus of 2.3%, the revenue target of 15.1%, and out of which 13.9% is the tax revenue target. And in the budget deficit is about 6.7%, and in absolute terms, that's about 2.2 trillion rupees. So this needs to be financed. Major portion of this, about 90% of this 2.2 trillion rupees is financed through domestic finance, and that is what you see in this particular slide. Next up, you see here on the expenditure side, interest payments, capex from 2019 to 2025, composition of the expenditure. And you see capex is, in absolute terms, it has increased, and also as a percentage of GDP. In the budget, capex allocation was about 4% of GDP, or in absolute terms, 1.3 trillion rupees. And from that 1.3 trillion rupees, about 480 billion rupees have been allocated for road building and bridges, likewise for the port, likewise. And what I'm going to talk to you about next, and what you see here on these two slides, will be the national budget submission that we at the chamber do annually. And 17 of our proposals we found that have been mentioned in the budget proposal, budget speech as well. And that is what you see here in these two slides. Next up, I'll just give you a quick update on the monetary policy. The Central Bank of Sri Lanka, as you see on this slide, has maintained its accommodative stance on the monetary policy, and the overnight policy rate is at 8%. You see inflation at a negative point. That is mainly because of the supply side factors on energy and transport. The comparative costs have come down. There's a base impact also. But the next slide is what's interesting. This is the fan chart presented by the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. And you see on your x-axis the timeline. So 25/1 is your 2025 quarter one, 26/1 is your 2026 quarter one. So you see towards the latter end of 2025 and towards 2026, the fan chart tells us that the inflation will reach 5%. So that's the 5% headline inflation on a quarterly basis is the target that the Central Bank and the Ministry of Finance has an agreement on. Next up is on the Federal Reserve. That's on the US side. The Federal Reserve also maintained its interest rates. Why am I talking about the Federal Reserve? It is mainly because close to 25% of our exports go to the US, and it's important to understand in terms of what's happening there in terms of inflation, what's happening with interest rates. So the US inflation rate, CCPI, is a little high. It's at around 3% for December 2024. The president of the US is in discussion with the Federal Reserve, and he's issuing sentiments where he wants the rates to come down. Previously, the Federal Reserve was talking about reducing their interest rates on a frequent basis, but right now, looking at inflation numbers, unemployment figures and all, I think they'll maintain this interest rate for some time, but there will be reductions that we can expect for this year from the Federal Reserve. Coming back to Sri Lanka on the growth side of things, for the first 9 months, we see about 5.2% growth. And the central bank is expecting 5% growth for 2024. And interestingly, the president also mentioned in the budget speech 5% growth for 2025. And if you look at a breakdown of where this particular growth is coming from, that is what you see here in this particular slide on agriculture, industry, and services for each quarter from 2018 to 2024. And that is what you see here. Next up on the growth outlook side of things, you see that the central bank is quite optimistic in terms of growth outlook for 2025 at around 4%. The IMF is also at 3.5, whereas you see here that the World Bank and ADB are a little bit more pessimistic. Of course, these will be updated as the year progresses. Next up, we talk about the PMI index, the Purchase Managers Index. For January, manufacturing and services are above 50. So what does that indicate? The number indicates that the folks in these sectors are positive that there will be growth in these two areas of manufacturing and services, and there is positive outlook for these two. But of course, there is a constraint there. So this is a survey done by the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, I think it's done for the Western Province. But of course, you can consider it in this way. The Western Province contributes about 44% of GDP. Here, what you see here on this slide is actually an extraction from our Outlook report. So if you are interested in purchasing our Outlook report, it's available online. What you see here is for the inland revenue, specifically 1.9 trillion. How is this broken down? What is its composition for 1.9 trillion rupees? Mainly, it's from income tax of about 1 trillion and VAT of about 700 billion. So that in itself consists of 1.7 trillion rupees out of the 1.9 trillion for inland revenue. On the external front, what I have here on this particular side to your left-hand side is the merchandise exports at about 12.7 billion. Out of that 12.7 billion, industrial exports is about $9.9 billion, and agricultural exports are at around $2.5 billion. Now that's on the merchandise side. So service sector exports were at around a little over $3 billion, out of which IT BPO consists of about $848 million of service exports. So a total of about $16.7 billion of exports we experienced for the year 2024. In terms of worker remittances, that's what you see on your right hand side, slowly picking up, coming back to pre-crisis levels. Of course, the highest has been about 7.2 billion. Last year, we saw about $6.6 billion of worker remittances coming in. And finally, on the external front, I would like to talk about the tourism numbers. What you see on your right-hand side again is a graph extracted from our Outlook report. What you see is 2024 compared to 2023 and compared to our benchmark year of 2018. The tourism industry, what's important to understand is not particularly the numbers coming in, but of course the average spent, how many days are they staying here, what are the activities they're involved in, and of course in terms of regulation issues, what are the issues that the tourists themselves are facing. I think these are topics that needs to be discussed further. So that's it from our end. Thank you very much for tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you next month. Thank you.